I really was looking at the questions today and saying how much we put the stuff that we can't control in present in like our minds constantly. It's exhausting, really.
Yeah, I think, right before I do this, I come from 2 back-to-back nursing programs teaching these same skills in a leadership course there. And it's interesting coming from them, this is their 3rd year. So they're like 21, 22 years old. And just to see them, struggling with these, and they kind of are just looking at you like, do I really need this stuff? And I'm like, oh, wow, your next few years, your next few decades, the challenges. And it kind of goes along with what we've seen in our course, is that people who seem to benefit the most are those that are in the middle of suffering or have had some suffering in their life to be able to apply this to, and they kind of recognize the need and the motivation to do it. So not that you have to be in terrible pain and suffering to get something out of this, but there does seem to be a correlation for those that grow the most.
Yeah. Acknowledging that you need it is the biggest problem, and then opportunity if you can get past it, right?
Yeah. I can't remember if we talked, was last week we were in New York, right? When we logged on? Yes.
Yeah.
And so I don't know, Jenny, I think you started something here. I kind of told the publisher about what we were doing and just some of the traction. And I thought last week was I felt that was pretty impactful. The session last week was just, not that the others weren't, but it was just kind of a different level of getting in touch with some of these skills and applying them to some real raw areas of our lives, and shared some of that information with them, just how that impacted me. And so they decided to, everybody at the conference last week got a copy of the book. So there were 1,500 copies of this went out, and I said, I'd be willing to do a book study with anybody that gets a book in New York. So they had like 45 people already signed up to do a book study. So I thought that was just, thanks for sharing this idea and working with me on this idea. And it's cool. So
totally thrilled to hear that, Brad. And I agree with you. Last week's session, especially, I feel like was very impactful for me. I think there was a lot of things that came together in my mind, and then it was like, but now what do I do with it? Oh, right. Next week's skill building. It all fits so nicely, Brad. It's like, so great.
Welcome, everybody. It's great to see all your faces again every week. I sure look forward to this. But so this session, so we've covered 2 domains already, and this is our 3rd and final domain of this particular framework. So we've gone through the biological, what's our body's response to challenge, and then we separated out, have feelings and emotions about challenge. And we talked extensively the last 3 weeks on those skills. So how do I label that, express it in a healthy way, and take some ownership? How much control do I have over that dial of intensity of the emotion that I'm experiencing in response to challenge? And then this week is the highest, what I would say, if you had to kind of put this in a hierarchy, this is the highest level of skill. So this is, and when we look at kids, we don't often get very far down this track before 3rd or 4th grade. We spent most of the time in physical and emotional regulation with kiddos. This requires the ability to think about thinking. So that's kind of that a little bit higher level of, can I examine my thoughts? Can I notice what's going through my head? Can I pull that out, write it down? And then also, can I manipulate that? So it takes this skill of self-awareness to be able to notice what's going through your head, recognize it, put some words to it, and then label that. And then also, the next step is, and we're going to explore that a little bit, but where do I have patterns? Do I notice any patterns of thought that I've developed over the years, that those that are helpful? And then, we talk less about positive and negative. We talk mostly about helpful and unhelpful, or healthy and unhealthy when it comes to thinking. So, and you're the best judge of that for yourself. So all of this is super personal. We all have, I put in here some pretty commonly identified thought patterns that can trip people up. And so that I think that's interesting as part of this chapter. But I'll throw out the highlights that I think, hope you keyed in on from this chapter. So number one, attention. Attention theory is sort of heavy in this chapter. So because attention, what you choose to attend to is ultimately what helps build these patterns of thoughts and beliefs that you have. And the cool thing about attention is that we have some control over what we choose to attend to throughout the day. And so there's a relationship here too. And I was just really digging into this morning. I don't know why. I think it was because I was thinking about this, but this whole idea of a negativity bias that we could be as human beings really, and we talked about that we're hardwired to focus on threat. Are we hardwired to focus on what's wrong a lot of the time? And for survival reasons, to pay attention to what's going, these brains are problem-solving machines, and they will search out things that we think still need to be resolved. You notice this when you lay down to go to sleep at night, and your brain is still just trying to solve these problems that we don't have answers to, and it's just going and going and going. So what I was wondering was, and in this chapter I talked about, what if you go through the day and 80% or even 90% of what you think about or recognize or pay attend to are what we might consider to be negative, threatening things. 90% of the day. What sort of messaging is then coming through as far as what shape I should be in? What should my mood be? If you're responding to threat 90% of the time, or looking for threat, searching for threat, that's going to there's a result. There's a consequence of that. Biological consequence, a mood consequence, behavior consequence to that, versus maybe if we were 50-50 and it's just kind of throwing out. So the other interesting thing about human beings is it's really hard to attend to more than one thing at a time. So while you're attending to threat, what could you possibly be missing right over here that might not be threatening, might actually be wonderful? It might lead to joy, might be joyful. So what my thought this morning was, oh my gosh, what if our default is threat response? What if our default is looking at the negative? And to have joy, you have to work to get it. You have to be intentional about cultivating joy. What if the default is this experience, and then the default isn't joy? What if the default isn't joy? And that's just kind of a interesting thing that sort of goes along with this when we talked about being, it all relates back to that physical, biological sort of survival mechanism of being aware of threats in our environment to survive. But that almost sounds like it's kind of hard work to create joy. And we talk a lot about this. You've seen the work coming up lately about mental health in the workplace. How do we find joy in the workplace? And it's like, well, maybe it's not there if we don't create it. Maybe it's sort of not there by default, which would mean that we would have to take some action and some steps to make that happen. Then the question becomes, well, what can make that happen? How can we create that? And we've talked about pitfalls to stay, that are going to lead down that path, but also we need to think about things that can strengthen that muscle. And one of the things I hope you got out of here was the gratitude practice. It's just one way that we can strengthen that muscle to be able to be intentional about paying attention to what's going well, or maybe some of those wonderful things. And I think sometimes people think, oh, I got to think of this big giant thing that's happened that's wonderful. Actually, what we've noticed is that the smaller sometimes the things that people find, the more we're sort of working that muscle to have to kind of look for those things. Let's see. Lastly, I think the thing that I wanted to say about attention is that I started the chapter off by talking about our ability to go to the future and go to the past. And I think this is where we pull back into that mindfulness practice from skill 2. The other benefit here is with skill 7, because if we are pulled to keep ourselves in the present, there's less threat right in front of us, right in the here and now. There's often a lot of threat in the future, and we seem to sometimes focus on threat from the past. So if we can keep attention right here, that can also sort of strengthen that muscle to be more aware of what's the joy right in front of me right now that I may miss if my attention is pulled to threat in the future or threat in the past. Hope that makes sense. And then I think we would just go into the reflection questions from this. I do often fall back to this, when you're having, so the other skills, so gratitude, and the other concrete skill here is the skill of reframing our thoughts and beliefs and examining those to be more moderate if you want to, but just being aware. Remember, we talked about where that line is. And then if something crosses that line, that equals threat to me. And so we go back to fight or flight kicking in. But just being aware of where that line is, that's based on your beliefs. A lot of them start like people should, or people should never, or I must, or I have to, or everything, a good example, everything has to be perfect, or it has to be my way. Or sometimes these thoughts, when you say them out loud, these core beliefs they just sound kind of ridiculous sometimes. But if you dig down under the surface level, they're often protected by a whole bunch of defenses. So that's a little bit of the homework, is getting to what's underneath all that. But I think the easiest way that I've come across to help people reframe their own thinking is, once we come across these situations where their thoughts have gotten in the way of joy, is to say, what kind of advice would you say to a friend of yours that's thinking that way? It's just, that has been the easiest way for me to help someone shift out, because we often give great advice to other people when they say these kind of extreme statements or thoughts, but we rarely give that to ourselves. It's just, that's an interesting truth that I've seen. Okay, so I'll be quiet, and then I think if we would want to go into breakout rooms and just kind of take a look at the reflection questions from this chapter together.
Okay, can I just ask a quick question,
Yes,
Brad,
sure.
before we
Yes.
go into the breakout rooms?
Yeah.
I was really curious about, like, when you talk about these sweeping statements, like, I'm not perfect. This specific thing I failed at, and therefore I'm the worst.
Yeah. Generalized.
How does that fit into, like you're saying? And I think there's validity to your statement that I wonder if threat or being fearful or whatever is something we have to overcome, like focusing on threat and trying to seek joy.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just wondering, do you have any sense of where that came from? Like, why would we be labeling things as everything or nothing in our thinking as a threat response? Do you have any insight into that?
Well, to me, it's probably a real basic categorization, phenomena of the brain. We put things in categories. We like to organize. If you think of the brain as sort of a computer model, which is kind of a common way to think about filing and sorting things and being able to make decisions about things, it helps us put things in boxes and make sense of the world around us. It's just that once you start a belief that you kind of think the way something is this way, the way the brain works is we just suck in all kinds of information that sort of matches that. So it gets bigger, our pile of evidence, and we get really good at rejecting anything that may be contrary to that. So it's almost like, if you think about AI algorithms and the way some of the computer models work, that the more you click on something, the more you get fed those kinds of things. And the more you see those kinds of things, and then you sort of, I always use the Death Star sort of analogy as Star Wars. Like, if you have this belief system, it's just this huge thing that you've collected evidence for over the last 30 years. And then somebody says something that's sort of contrary to that. It doesn't get anywhere near. I mean, it's shot down clear out there. The problem is, what if that thought that you've developed or belief that you've developed is, I'm not worthy of love and attention from other people. And then somebody comes along and wants to say, well, I care about you, right? That's that little ship coming in. I have all this evidence. And what's, in the work that I've done with people that have been in sort of that hopeless situation, what's the first thought do you think a person would think through their lens when somebody comes along and says, well, I care about you, after they have all this evidence that says that people don't care about me? What would they do with that?
I'd imagine it's, no, you don't, right?
Yeah. You're just saying that, right? So they come right back. They can even take something that could change that idea and twist it up to fit into the pile. That's why this is sort of a higher level skill, because you really have to examine these patterns that you've established through evidence to change those, we have to reframe, we have to look for new evidence, and we have to strengthen these other muscles, like gratitude.
Great. Anybody else have any questions before we go into the rooms?
A question about balancing that worry of the future versus being present and grateful.
Yeah.
It's almost like the analogy I was thinking of is how you drive down a highway, right? You're always looking ahead, but you also want to be aware of your immediate surroundings, a little bit what's behind you, but around you, forward, around you, beside you, forward, right? Always cycling through that. Yeah. Well, the future is full of potential. The future is full of worry as well. So I struggle sometimes with that, spending too much time in the future versus, okay, at the end of the day, things are still gorgeous. I got a lot to be grateful for. Beautiful day. Finally we're above zero here in Calgary. It's awesome, right? Yeah. So again, I think other people struggle with that too. And any advice, the power of the now and all the rest of that, right? It's hard to practice.
Yes. And it is. That's why it's a skill, right? But I'm smiling because I struggle with all these, just like you all do. And this is a big one for me. And a lot of us that are brought up with this idea of be prepared. I got to prepare for everything. Well, how am I going to be prepared if I don't think about the future? And so, just like all of our other skills, the whole theme is balance, right? Self-regulation is balance. It's not saying you don't ever think about the future, you don't think about the past. It's just like what you said. One thing's really stuck with me though. If I'm going to, where do I have my most control over what happens in the future?
Right now, what decisions I make right now.
Exactly. So it always drives back to, how am I caring for myself now? If I have a big exam tomorrow, if I have a big day tomorrow, if I don't get any sleep right now, if I'm laying here thinking about that tomorrow, how am I prepping for tomorrow if I don't get any sleep tonight? So that's where it becomes ineffective. It's always, to me, about what's effective, what's helpful and healthy, and what's not. That's where the line is for you. If you already have 14 plans for that event that could happen next week, I would challenge you to think, do I need a 15th one? Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But like I said, the brain loves to solve problems. So if it's got an unsolvable problem, wow, it's going to want to go after that sometimes.
So is that higher level thinking, planning, trying to anticipate, trying to manage the future versus the living in the now, which is more the lizard brain, like trying to survive the moment?
I actually think it's harder and probably takes higher level to be able to recognize that you're being pulled, just like having the conversation we're having right now, recognizing when you're being pulled too much to the future to bring yourself back. That's super high skill level right there. Yeah.
Cool.
Awesome. Okay. So thank you for the help.
Good question.
I have a question that I'm wondering, and I hope that someone with some clinical experience can maybe show some data on this, but how is there anybody left in our society who doesn't have some form of PTSD? Because I feel like everybody I meet has some kind of tragedy or trauma from their childhood or from their occupation. I don't who are these people that we hear about in studies where it's like 80% of people don't have trauma? I'm like, where are these people? I've never met them. Everyone I know has trauma.
Yeah, I think I said that. If I didn't, I usually do in my talks, that I almost everybody I meet in today's world has something in their history that they would consider traumatic. And it's interesting when we talk about that in relation to this skill, because in our group we're always talking about, is this adaptive? How did we get to this part where we're doing these things? It's supposed to be helping us. And just the brain's ability, or it thinks it's helping us by replaying these situations over and over and over again, to be like, well, don't forget about that. That was bad for you. Remember, that didn't feel good. So let's play that about 10,000 times to make sure you remember it. And it's like, okay, I got it. 10,000 times is too many. And in PTSD, we call that flashbacks. There are a lot of things that we describe that as, but it's gotten to the point where it's not adaptive, really. It's getting in our way, and it gets this groove going to where it starts to form beliefs, and it gets so strong. So yeah, I'm with you. I don't know. I don't know where these people are that don't have any challenges in their life. But okay, so what themes came out of the discussion. Any themes with this gratitude or these patterns of thought that kind of can trip us up?
We were talking a lot about how, like, trying to prepare for something, again, something that we feel strongly about. Like last week, I really liked how you were talking about when our core beliefs are challenged. And a lot of the work Gordon and I, so we were in a separate room, do is to challenge those beliefs. You know, we're trying to help people move away from these core beliefs that we carry in our province, especially. You know, I was just in a discussion today where doctors were saying, like, Alberta is, and Calgary is the worst user of energy in the world. So we have the biggest shift to make, if you will.
Okay.
And so this is one of the things that we're trying to change, and it feels impossible in that. And so I think there's a lot of preparation. Like Gordon and I were talking about how before we go into one of these big discussions, we're playing out these possible scenarios of, when they say this, I'm going to say this, and when they say this, I'm going to say this. So to me, that's that pattern. You know, we're not able to just wait and see and be ready to respond like your training program is teaching us. Instead, we're trying to control this story, which we clearly see over and over again we can't control. So I don't know, that's a lot of words. Did I do a good job of explaining that, Gord, or can you offer?
Yeah, I think so. And core of what we're talking about, Jenny, is trust in yourself, loving yourself enough to react appropriately in the moment. And that's what I think this is what you're trying to teach as well, Brad, is trust yourself. You can't prepare for every possible scenario. Be the watcher is what I'm learning from a different series of classes, meditation and Buddhism. Be the watcher, control your mind, enjoy the quiet moments, and trust in the moment that even though someone's coming to attack you with a purpose, you will stand your ground, and not internalize it immediately. Those are the challenges. And it's like flexing a muscle, practice over and over again, like you've been saying, Brad. It's tough, but you know, it's never too late to learn it.
So I would probably reframe what you just said. Thank you for sharing that both, but I would so what we're looking here is individual personal skills. So to me, what you just described is a challenge of something that's outside of your control, a system of people that believe differently than you. That's the challenge. So what can we control? The whole book's been about what you can control. And to me, it sounds upsetting. You know, the mood is that you're upset by that. You're angry, you're sad, or all these emotions about it. So what are your beliefs in that? If you want to effectively impact that, what do you have control over? I would say one thing is, if your mood gets to be too angry or too depressed or too extreme, you probably won't be effective in that. Also, what I heard you say, Jenny, is that you seem to wrestle with, or I'm just going to use your word, impossible. It seems impossible. So if that's the thought going through my head, that today this feels impossible, right? So this is where I would go with you in that. It's not about changing all, it is about changing all of them. But what we're learning here is what I'm most concerned about is what's going on between your two ears, because you have control of that. Because if you are feeling that it's impossible, that's going to impact your emotion. It's going to impact your body. It's going to impact your motivation. It's probably going to impact the way that you approach them. It might seem desperate. It might seem reactive. It might seem all the things that you don't want to be. So I need to work on that. What is possible? And what's a realistic timeline? You know, those kind of questions. What are you going to go from here to here overnight? Is that why we're feeling like it's impossible? We want that to happen, but the reality is probably not. So what is success? What is possible? I think that's the work that we're doing with this skill. Does that make sense? It's taking just a step back from where you were going with that.
Well, yeah, because that's the skill of reframing it, right? So that's where I'd be labeling, this is what my pattern is, right? And how I'm saying, you know, this is impossible and this is what's going to happen and da-da-da. And then reframing that as what is possible, minimizing the threat, if you will, is I think what the skill is. Is that right?
Yeah. Yes. Well, just being aware of what that belief is. I want these people to see my point of view. I want them to change. They have to change. They have to do all. And so how do I get from where we are right now to that? And I don't have control over those people. And I know when you put yourself in that, you know, when you have such a strong belief about something and you really believe everyone has to do this way, it's going to be difficult.
In our group, we just talked about the power that gratitude plays into your emotional regulation, and how important it is to really look. You're not looking for large things. It's the small things that kind of keep you staying as regulated as possible, and how it really does affect your mood and the mood of others that are you're dealing with on a day-to-day basis, for sure.
Yeah, I love that. And I also think, if we put this if then, a lot of these things get us in trouble when we say if then. I'll only be happy if everyone sees it my way. I'll only be happy if wow, that's putting your happiness clear out here. And then what are we going to do right now? Be unhappy. So until that gets met. So I think those are the kind of rules and beliefs that we're talking about here. Great. And the gratitude is such a strengthening thing to do, staying present in the moment. But what else? Good stuff.
I think a phrase in the book that said something like, we can control all of our emotions, or all emotions can be controlled, or something like that.
I don't know.
And we had a bit of a discussion about that, because Amy was saying that, well, a lot of these things are actually a physical threat. Even if they are just social emotional, they could have a lasting physical threat. There was a lot of examples. So we had a nice discussion, or a good discussion about that, but we didn't really go into the reflection questions this week.
Yes, if you dig deep enough, a lot of these could be seen as physical threat. I'll be excluded from the tribe or the group or whatever. But the practical piece of it is where are the places that you can intervene?
Yeah, it was the phrase in your book that said we can always control our thoughts. And
what page
that
is
was
that?
a grandiose thinking
I have
of
to look
today
at
when
that.
you said we shouldn't say always, every, never.
What page is that? I'll have to look at it.
And so it didn't leave space for the time where somebody does something so intense, even if it's social without physical, if it's so intense that there's no way to briefly, as we process a negative emotion, to first think something negative before we reframe it.
Where is that?
I think the phrase is only you can control your emotions. Not always you can, but not, that's about owning your emotions.
That makes
So
sense.
I guess my word phrase comes to, I guess my brain inserts the word always, but only you can control your emotions, except when I can't.
And I disagree with that.
Are not in control of your emotions.
Because we're social beings, I disagree with that. I think if we smile at somebody, we briefly positively affect somebody's chemicals in their body. Or if we kick somebody, we briefly affect their emotion. So that's backward to where I would say I would never say always or never. I would lean towards often or more often.
But the phrase doesn't include any of those adjectives, always or often. It just says only you. Only is not a frequency. It's a...
Right. Only is an amount of a group, and that's what I disagree with. I think other people can affect our emotions because we're social beings.
Yeah.
If you pick somebody, or you hug somebody, you affect them.
Yeah, that's an interesting.
Yeah, we do kind of differentiate between influence and control. Yeah.
I did have one simple question, practical question, Brad, as we were talking about this gratitude thing and wondering why it was 3. Just out of curiosity, is it because sort of what you led off this conversation with, that we potentially have a tendency to want to focus on threats? So that, are we trying to stack gratitude so that we have, more, we're giving ourselves more gratitude than allowing default?
Actually, it's simply just from some research that was done on 3 good things. It's actually, a line of research saying that 3 good things can significantly impact mood. So it's a good number. I like 3 also.
That's 3 good reasons.
You can't sit on a stool without the 3 legs, right? There you go.
There you go.
Okay, so we are close to the hour here. So I don't know, Brad, if you want to lead us in. So next week is our last week, right? So
yes.
if you want to offer some thoughts before we part
Yes.
today might be helpful. Thank you.
I do want to, yeah. And one of the things I started off this whole process was, but make sure you don't ruin the experience by overthinking. Don't let that get in the way of your skill development. That does happen quite frequently, actually. Next week, we are moving into motives. So motives, what we talk about in the second skill here, as far as cognitive regulation go, is how do we get these psychological needs met that we have as human beings in healthy versus unhealthy ways. So we absolutely want to be aware of these needs. They're fundamental. Some research we're drawing on here is some work that was done by DC and Ryan in the late 90s. The framework is called self-determination theory, but they really boiled down our fundamental needs as human beings, psychological needs and motives, into three. Again, the three, I don't know, Gord, three fundamental psychological needs. And their research showed that if these needs aren't being met, our likelihood for depression and anxiety goes up significantly. Motives can be seen as the building blocks for individual personality. I think this is a really fascinating piece of self-regulation, just as who we are, what's important to us, and what drives our behavior. That's motivation. So looking at these three areas, and I'll just throw them out there. So they identified competence, our need to feel good at stuff, good at things we don't like to do, things that we're not having success with or failing at. The second one is autonomy. So that's the need to feel free to have choice and do what we want to do when we want to do it. That's where we bump up against authority and rules and people. You know, I know there's people in this group that have a strong need for autonomy. They don't like to be told what to do or how things are. Also, the third one is relatedness. So that's the need for connection to other people. And I love this model, especially when you start to think about how we were impacted during the pandemic and the research that says if these needs aren't being met, and I think I talked earlier, if any of you remember that day during the pandemic where you looked in the mirror, it was like, I'm not okay, things are different, I need to do something different with myself. This is not going well. I think these three were key for me. Competence was impacted, autonomy was impacted, and relatedness was impacted. So it's a really interesting model to describe why we weren't maybe feeling so good during that time.
I love these three psychological needs, and I find it fascinating that profit is not one of them, because that seems to be something that comes. I think about like basic income, and people are like, oh, if you're not, if you're just given money for not doing any work, you'll just become an alcoholic and sit on the couch all day, right? Like people say that all the time, right? And so, but like, I noticed there's only 2 citations here, but like there should be millions of citations of this. Like this seems so obvious. We should have basic income tomorrow. Like if there's so much psychological evidence that all you need is competency, independence, and connection, then why not, give people what they need to survive? I feel like all of the arguments against it are just like moot at this point.
Interesting. There are motive profiles that take into account status, power, money, relationship. There are more complex motive profiles. I pulled this one in because I like the simplicity of it. And I think it really gets to the core values of human fundamentals. So yeah, good. That's a good call out though.
I can't be on the call next week. I'm going to be offline for a week and a half just for mental health and marital health and all the rest of it. So I wanted to thank you, Brad, Jenny, for putting on the course, and all the participants, especially that part you and I chat about, Brad, about the vulnerability. It's okay. Instead of going to the rage, go to the vulnerability piece if there's other people in the room, and that will work to my benefit. It's more honest and pure instead of driving people away. So that and everything else I'm learning is just trying to get more control in the moment instead of letting other people take in my power. So again, thank you so much.
Yeah. It's a lot of strength and vulnerability, Gord. So yeah, that's awesome.
Fantastic. Okay, we've gone a little over time, so if that's okay, I guess we'll wrap here.
I would just before we end, I would just say Discord is normal in all kinds of discussion, and so that's okay. I hope if anyone wants to process any of that offline, I'd be happy to do that. Just want to make sure everybody's okay with that.
Yeah, you bet, Brad. I'll pass that on as well. Thank you so much. I hope you have a great night, everyone. Great week. We'll see you next week to close this off. Thank you.
All right, great. Have a good week. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.